The plot of Next of Kin is broadly what happens to a British family in which one member of the family has become radicalized and has disappeared off to a foreign country. And really it's about what happens to the people that are left behind in terms of the offices of state that suddenly grind into action when something like this happens, and the sort of extraordinary pressures that are brought to bear on an otherwise ordinary family. And that setup sort of resolves in some ways into slightly more kinetic kind of thrillerish territory a bit. And then from that, it shifts course again into focusing on the sort of emotional heart of the way we're looking at the story, which is people that make the sorts of decisions that the character of Danny makes. They've got dads and mums and uncles and aunts and cousins, and they didn't ask for this. And they have to find a way to proceed through the world with this difficult, challenging, uncomfortable truth that's very adjacent to them. Guy is, I'm the father of the family. We're a sort of small nuclear family in one way and a vast extended family in another. Our sort of immediate family is my character Guy, Archie's character Mona, and our son, played by Dante Patel. But of course, beyond that, we have my mother-in-law, played by Shabana Azmi, lots of cousins and brothers and their kids, and you know, one of the for me, one of the most interesting and kind of exciting, really, aspects of doing this project has been that in the story, before things go, you know, bad, like I spent weeks filming scenes in the set that's our house, in which I was the only non-Asian actor. And of course, lots of Britain looks like that now, and we should acknowledge that and normalize it and make it clear that in these sorts of families, nobody sees those differences because they're not real. And so, yeah, I am nominally the ha-ha patriarch. I wouldn't even say that. But yeah, that's who Guy is. And professionally, he's a lobbyist. And he works with all sorts of people. But when we pick up the story, he's working as a kind of conduit between the British government and various Middle Eastern financing entities, as exists very much these days. You know, I mean, half of London appears to be owned by the kind of Qatari sovereign wealth fund at this point. We were filming at the Excel Centre the last few days, and I noticed as we walked out, it says, you know, the Excel Centre, part of the Abu Dhabi something or other. So, you know, that's a very real thing. And of course, for the purposes of our story, it's kind of useful to have what might initially appear to be a tangential connection between my professional world and the events that start to unfold in my family world. And maybe or maybe not, they might achieve some point of contact. You never know. At the beginning of the story, it's pretty good and happy and healthy. And one of the things that Guy loves is that his childhood and his background look nothing like his present. And I think that's something that he's very embracing of and embraced by. But of course, you know, once events start to take the turns that they do, primarily the strain on Mona and Guy's relationship is to do with the fact that Mona becomes very, very, and understandably, split on where her loyalties lie. She has this nephew who is off the reservation and doing things he probably shouldn't be doing. Obviously, the catalytic event of the whole thing is the death of Mona's brother. And so she's obviously operating kind of through a kind of screen of kind of grief and panic and, you know, a combination of things that don't necessarily mean that she's going to make the best decisions. And of course, the sort of people that are left behind somewhat by the decisions she does make are, you know, mainly my character and the character of our son. Initially, what you know, they construct this portrait of this kind of, you know, colorblind, Rainbow Nation, happy sort of environment. And then, of course, you know, it's almost a cliche in terms of like, what is, you know, if you were in part of an Anglo-Asian family, what would be the biggest nightmare you could possibly imagine? This. And of course, if you're not Asian by any kind of descent, but you're in an Anglo-Asian family, these kind of events are so extreme that on some level, Guy's going to be, you know, reactive in a way which doesn't reflect particularly well on him. But I think when people are scared and threatened, their best selves don't necessarily appear. It's more interesting and I think more realistic to, rather than when, as these events unfold, that rather than Mona and Guy being like, we're all in this together, well, actually we're not. For a lot of the story, we're going in completely different directions, both fueled by fear, but just different kinds of fear. And I think that's truthful, and I also think it's dramatically quite satisfying when we sort of find our way back to each other. Because I think anyone in a situation like this would be terrified and probably make decisions that speak to things we don't like to talk about. It has been interesting to explore, and actually, Paul and Natasha have picked very good moments. Because the thing is that in some ways it's ultimately never in doubt, because the audience gets to see how I'm truly affected by the things that Mona's going through in her absence. So actually, at base, you know, I love her, I'm trying to protect her, I'm just frustrated by the unilateral way that she's approaching things at times. But we say things to each other as characters which are hurtful, which are to do with being tested in ways that you could never have sort of imagined. And the only hope any of us have got really moving forward is to drop a sense of division and just kind of, there's no other way to move forward. But of course, when people are frightened, they can't help but suddenly see differences where there weren't ones 5 minutes ago. And I think it's a testament to the strength of the writing that we go there quite a lot in both directions. But, you know, there are, I think if you're going to portray a mixed race couple placed under intolerable pressures that in some ways are to do with other people making judgments about the mixed raceness of it all, then you want to see how they actually respond to that. And I think that's been handled really interestingly. I first got the scripts of this back in October of last year, and we lived in a slightly different Britain then. I mean, not that different, but I mean, recent events have kind of slightly supercharged all this. But the ongoing question of what do you do about radicalized young people who are citizens of, you know, a country and yet are acting on an ideology that threatens so many things about just society as a whole, that's not going away. And it's so threatening and scary to people, obviously, because it's threatening and scary. People who are that lost and disenfranchised are worthy of sympathy, because it can't be nice to be in that head. But I think from the purposes of empathy, which is slightly different, and there's an important difference, I think what really interested me about it and has interested me all the way through is that we're looking at this slightly from the side, and we're looking at it through how does a young British Muslim who's possibly like an atheist, who's got a cousin who is prepared to, strap high explosives to them, how does he react to that? And how do we generate understanding about the experiences of those people? Because if that way, I think we might get some clarity about how to maybe get to grips with this, because it's not, sadly, going away. The young men who do the things that they do are in some ways rejecting their own humanity to do what they do. I mean, in essence, and so that it becomes difficult to understand it if that's essentially the Faustian bargain that they're making. But there's all these other people who love them, who to them were like, 5 minutes ago, they were a 9-year-old kid running around in the park playing football. And now all of a sudden they're something else. Well, what about those human beings? And it's like those 3 numbskulls who were running around in Borough Market the other day. They've got collectively, hundreds of relatives who are horrified and appalled and, mortified and desperately sad about what happened.